Hey guys, this is Miss Harlequin, and in this video, we're going to be going through the questions, breaking them down, and figuring out the right answer for the passage on the roof of the world, which comes from the 2014 New York State ELA exam for 7th graders. Now, the actual reading of the passage can be found in another video on my YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to go directly to the questions. Okay. Why did the author and his friends choose to travel with John Dorji? All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm not even going to look at answer choices. Remember that my favorite strategy is to actually cover up the answer choices to figure out the answer on your own, predict the answer, and then once you know what the answer to the question is, just find the multiple choice answer that best matches it. So when I go back into the passage, I find this paragraph starting with line 28 that mentions John Dorji. So I'm going to reread it and see if I can answer this question. The section's called Becoming a Modern Nomad. Some friends and I were traveling with our teacher in the eastern part of Tibet. Dojum was born in Tibet, lived the first years of his life as a traditional nomad. All right, so this guy is their teacher because he knows what it's like to be a nomad. Because of political problems, Dojum's family had to flee to India when he was still young. We were following Dojum back to his birthplace and getting a taste. All right, so here's why they're doing it. They're getting a taste of that ancient nomadic way of life with a few modern updates. All right, so they basically want to know what it's like to be nomads, to be modern nomads. All right, so when I remove my covered up answer choices, which one best matches it? Matches what I predicted. He could show them the nomadic life he had lived in Tibet. Yes. That's exactly what the answer is. That's what I predicted. But let's make sure this isn't the chocolate bar answer. Let's keep looking. Because he was friends with many of the local Tibetans, this has nothing to do with anything. Because he could teach them to communicate with the nomads. All right, I could see where this is a distractor answer, because obviously he would know how to communicate, but that's not the ultimate purpose. He could show them how to avoid traveling difficulties. Again, he probably can do that, but it doesn't match what I predicted and what the text evidence supports. So the answer choice is A. All right, question number 2. What does the author mean by describing yaks as true all-terrain travelers? All right, once again, I'm going to cover up the answers. I'm going to go back into the text, and when I do, I find this section called Problems Along the Way. That's where we have the description of yaks as all-terrain travelers. So let me go back and reread it. When it comes to crossing rough country, yaks are true all-terrain travelers. So I know that terrain means all kinds of land. Terrain is land. So if they're able to travel on all kinds of land, that means they're actually really great if you're traveling in a country that has a lot of different types of land. Some bumpy, some soft, some plain, some mountains. Many times the nomads have to cross raging rivers. Okay, that can be difficult, but the yaks should be able to do it. They're all-terrain. For the loyal and determined yaks, crossing is not a problem. But when we had to cross a river, our four-wheel drives turned out to be not so loyal and reliable. Okay, so cars aren't good in the river, but yaks are. They're all land travelers. Let's get rid of my box. The yaks are not afraid of rough country. That's true. The yaks are very gentle and good-natured. That doesn't really show anything about them traveling on all kinds of land. The yaks manage Tibet's geographical obstacles very well. Okay, geographic is related to land, right? The geography. When you talk about geography, you're talking about land. The yaks provide everything the Tibetan nomads need. Well, nobody said it's everything. That's extreme language. We are not going to use extreme language answers as our correct answers. That's a reason to eliminate. So I'm stuck between A and C. If I go back into the passage, a lot of the paragraph is talking about the obstacles, the problems that they face in the river, and how the yaks are able to cross the river with no problem. So are the yaks not afraid? See, I don't know if I can really say that this is true. Where does it show they're not afraid? Just because they can travel all kinds of land doesn't mean they're not afraid while doing it. Sometimes people do things even though they're afraid. So when I rethink answer A and I went back into the paragraph, I really saw that based on the text evidence, C was the best answer choice. Why does the author include the story about his trouble setting up a tent? All right. I think for this one, I guess I could cover up the answer choices for this and see if I go back into the paragraph where he has the trouble, if I can answer it. Now, if an author is including something into their article, this type of question is really asking you about the effect. How does it affect me as the reader? Either how does it make me feel, or what kind of information does it give? All right, so when I go back into the paragraph, I see that the author and his friends have a fancy, super modern tent, which is something that regular nomads would not have. So this is really showing that they're not used to being nomads and they don't know what it's like to be nomads. They really rely on expensive things to make them comfortable. And just having something that's expensive doesn't mean you're good at doing whatever the skill is, in this case, setting up a tent. So they're having trouble, and then some smiling nomad kids approach them and help them set it up. So that actually shows how nomads are actually pretty friendly and super helpful. Okay, so thinking about what I learned from this story, what answer choice best matches it? Explains why he wished he brought a better tent. No, that makes no sense. They had a super modern tent. You can't get better than that. To demonstrate the difficulty of working in the harsh climate. The climate had nothing to do with him not being able to set up the tent. They're just not good at it. They don't have the skills. To show why he would have preferred a Tibetan yak hair tent. No. Again, it's not about the tent. It's about the fact that they don't know what to do with it. To provide an example of the abilities and generosity of young Tibetans. That's exactly what I talked about, how friendly and helpful they are. That's the best answer choice. All right, next question. Which sentences from the article best explain why Tibet is called the roof of the world? All right, so here we have a best evidence question, which we've looked at in class. Best evidence questions are asking you to choose the peanut butter cup evidence, not the chocolate bar. So you really have to use logical reasoning. You have to think about what you're learning from each answer choice removed from the story. Does it show what the question is asking you? Does it show Tibet is the roof of the world? When I climbed mountain passes over 17,000 feet above sea level, I gasped for air. I was more than 3 miles high. All right, so this does show about how one of the reasons Tibet is the roof of the world is because it's so high. This could be the answer. It's like the roof. Times are changing in Tibet, and more people live and work in villages and cities. But there are still nomads who survive on the high plateau. No, this does not show roof of the world. Again, if I go back into the original passage where they first start talking about Tibet being the roof of the world, they talk about how it's called that because of Tibet's high elevation and the fact that it's hard to get to because towering mountains act like a fence and keep people away. So my answer has to be one of those two things. And this right here has nothing to do with that first paragraph when the author tells us about why it's the roof of the world. But when we had to cross a river, our four-wheel drives turned out to not be so loyal and reliable. We got stuck in the river. All right. Does this show that Tibet is the roof of the world? Not really. It does show that it's hard to drive around it and get around it, but it's not about how high it is. Finally, D. The weather in Tibet is cold, and the brutal wind seems to show no mercy. Sitting inside a nomad tent, though, you'd never know it. Okay, this is showing the harsh weather conditions of Tibet, but the harsh weather really doesn't have to do with the fact that it's the roof of the world. You can have a cold environment in other places in the world that aren't as high up as this. So the best answer choice is A. All right, next question. How is the article mainly structured? Is it A, with subsections focused on specific topics? Well, there are subsections, but are those sections only talking about specific topics? Maybe. This is tempting. I'm not going to eliminate it right away. With an exploration of one nomadic group's life. No, that's not true. It talks about nomads, but it's not just following one group. It's the writer and his friends exploring the nomad life with a guide. By presenting observations in chronological order. Okay, so chronological order is when you start from the beginning and then you do things in order, like this happened next, this happened third. So does this follow chronological order? All right, I would have to go back and double check that. All right, so the story really starts here. They travel with him. It's one. They travel, okay, this is when they're first arriving and they have their bags and they're piling into their cars. All right, here they're talking about the problems. They're talking about the cars. This is very difficult to see if this is chronological order. It does talk about traveling, and then it talks about nighttime. So this is actually, if we think about it, it does start the beginning of the trip, the travel of the trip, and then night. So this is actually chronological order. It's not as obvious because there aren't like strong keywords to say first, second, or third. But if I think about the events that are happening, they are happening in the logical order that they would happen in real life. All right, so this could be the answer. By contrasting positive and negative aspects of nomadic life. No, they never talk about what's positive. They never talk about what's negative. So I'm stuck between the subsections with specific topics and chronological order. When I go back once more to the article, here it's about becoming a modern nomad. Problems along the way. It's cold up there. See right here, now that I even look at the subsections, each subsection is not really talking about its own topic. This actually supports chronological order. Along the way, again, the travel. It's cold up there. They reach their destination. That is the chronological order of what things would happen. You would be traveling somewhere and then you would reach that destination. So, going back to look at those subsections really helped me eliminate answer choice A and end up with answer choice C. All right, which sentence from the article best supports the conclusion that traditional nomadic customs can be as good as modern conveniences? All right, we had the advantage of automobiles. Okay, that is a modern convenience. A luxury that nomads have happily survived without. When it comes time for a nomad family to move, they pack all their things into large backpacks and stack them on their yaks. We know the yaks are actually better than automobiles. So the question says, can be just as good. This is a very tempting answer. At one campsite, I remember wrestling with one of my tent poles. Some smiling nomad kids approached and helped me set it up. This doesn't show what the nomads use and that what they use is just as good. This just shows the kids helping them set up their modern tent. With a warm fire burning in the mud stove and snug black walls of the tent, you are comfortable as can be. This was not the case in the fancy modern tents my friends and I slept in. All right, so we're actually looking for that the nomad customs are as good. But this, the fancy modern tents are not good. So this can't be the answer. Though their lives are full of challenges, the nomads never take their day-to-day problems too seriously. They know how impermanent things are, including their homes. All right, this does not compare nomad lifestyle with modern lifestyle. So we're going to eliminate it. And we're going to go with answer choice A. Obviously, answer choice A is the only one that really shows that they're equal. C was definitely the distractor answer. But if you looked at it closely and realized that the question's asking how the traditional nomad customs are just as good, and you saw here that the modern tents are not as good, they're not good at all, so it doesn't really match. It's tempting, it's distracting. Somebody who's not reading as carefully is going to choose C. Okay, now for our final question, which of course is the longest one. Which of these is the best summary of this article? All right, so these summary questions are actually very, very difficult for the untrained. What you're really looking for in a nonfiction text is a summary that has the central idea, and then the details should actually be the most important details that show that central idea. They shouldn't be too specific. They shouldn't show things that are unrelated to what the entire article was mostly about. All right, so let's see if we can eliminate some of these summaries. We're going to have to go through them one at a time and really think about what the summary is telling us the text was about. On his travels to Tibet, the author found that although many Tibetan people have moved to cities, there are still those who prefer the nomadic life. They do not live in permanent homes, but instead move around in this 3-mile-high country. Their yak hair tents provide greater warmth than the author's modern tents. All right. That seems very specific. I was going with it until I got to this last line. I mean, the tent is just one small part of this article. Do I really need to talk about the tents being better in a summary? Where, I mean, if you look at it, I'm really only including 3 or 4 sentences. Even this detail over there about how many people have moved to cities, I mean, that's true, it's in the article, but is that really necessary to include in a summary? I mean, this article was really about the author exploring the nomadic lifestyle and seeing how there are still people who are nomads in Tibet. So, I mean, this part is true, but the moving to cities seems very specific. Too specific for what the article is mostly about. So I'm going to eliminate this. This can't be the summary. Way too many specific details that don't show a central idea. As the author learned during his visit to Tibet, Tibetan weather is harsh. All right, already I see that this is not relevant. This article is about the nomadic life. I'm not going to start out a summary not mentioning the nomadic life. However, the Tibetan nomads continue to follow the old ways, raising yaks for all their survival needs during their moves from place to place. So they start talking about being a nomad the 3rd sentence in. No, this is not a good, appropriate summary. Let's look at C. When the author traveled with friends to Tibet, yes, that's true, he learned that many Tibetans continue to live as nomads. Good. We start out by saying it's about being nomads. They follow the old customs of raising yaks, which help the nomads move from place to place, as well as provide for their basic needs. So there was a lot of talk about the yaks, so this is good to include. And though the lives of the nomads present many difficulties, they've developed happy attitudes that suit their lives. Yes, all those details about the nomads being very friendly and helpful. All right, so this is looking very tempting. There's nothing that's too specific. All of these general things support the idea about the nomadic lifestyle, which is really the central idea. Traveling in Tibet, the author saw that Tibetan nomads have learned to depend on the yaks for survival. It's very specific. I mean, that's not the only point of being a nomad. Yes, they talk about yaks, but that's not what the whole article is about. They get food, clothing, shelter, and even warmth from the animals, which are extremely good. All right, again, this is too specific. It is not only about the yaks. All right, so this makes the whole article seem like they're only talking about yaks and nomads. So this definitely can't be the summary. The best choice is C.